Thank you for this introduction and for the 10 minutes mini talk I'll make today. I decided to talk about the theme of borrowing concepts from different contexts and using it into your own. And this is a brief overview of my experience from research work on segregation in the last 20 or 30 years. My research interest was always focused on segregation structures and dynamics, mainly in Southern Europe and particularly in Athens. I studied in France in the 70s. It's a long time ago. So I was influenced by the Nouvelle Sociologie Urbaine, and that induced me, among other things, to consider segregation as a broad social issue, not confined only to the lower part of the socio-spatial hierarchy and to areas of social inclusion. As any segregation specialist, not positioned at the geographical core of the academic division of labor, I used tools and concepts imported from places that they are usually fabricated, especially from Anglo-America, where urban studies were first and mainly developed. These tools and concepts often create problems when you use them in different contexts. I have done some work on such problems of using concepts created elsewhere. And the two most recent questions I dealt with are first, the global reach of gentrification, and second, the importance of microsegregation. And I'll say two things about each. Regarding gentrification, the question was raised for me because I was working on a city, Athens, where there was a lot of talk about gentrification, but where I was not able to find corroborating evidence. In the neighborhoods most discussed as gentrified, I could not find evidence that social profiles changed in the expected way following gentrification processes. Subsequently, I worked a bit on the issue of how it is possible to skew, distort your vision and understanding of the reality before your eyes when you use uncritically the dominant concepts and tools in the field, concepts and tools which pretend to be universal. My positions about this are formulated in two papers, one in critical sociology in 2012 and another one in urban and regional studies in 2018. These two papers attracted some attention and produced some discussion. And my central point is that gentrification, like segregation, is a mid-range concept which continues to be context-related even when it is presented and used as universal. Its unwarranted universal use creates several problems, like the withdrawal of attention from causal links within processes and the focus instead of attention to similarities in outcomes, the minimization of contextual parameters, and eventually the loss of power to analyze local processes and adequately inform actions against gentrification in specific locations. We will probably have the chance to discuss the issue of gentrification later when we will discuss the third paper on ecosystem-based adaptation in Rio de Janeiro and the concept of climate gentrification. The second issue I'm dealing with more recently is microsegregation. The starting point was again the analysis of segregation in Athens, where microsegregation in the form of vertical segregation among those living in different floors in apartment blocks is an important parameter of the city's socio-spatial structure, and as it involves more or less 30% of its population. I have been working on this form of microsegregation in Athens for about 20 years, trying to figure out its structure, the actors involved, producers, consumers, decision makers, the causes of the process through which it materialized, as well as its significance. By significance, I mean, what difference does it make to have microsegregation forms, and how do they affect the reproduction of social relations and eventually social inequalities? Working on this theme in the urban studies fields, you have the impression that you work on some singularity, even on some kind of deviance from the universal urban rule. However, the more I work on this issue, the less I feel Athens is a kind of exception. Microsegregation in the vertical or any other form is quite common in many cities across the globe. It's something you can find in ancient Rome, in modern Paris, and actually in many different cities under different forms, following some different systemic logic, with different actors involved sometimes. Nevertheless, it is always about the unequal quality of microspaces and the unequal access to those offering more by those groups that have more resources. You can find microsegregation even within the comparatively egalitarian conditions of state socialism, and there is such evidence from Bucharest, from St. Petersburg, Leningrad, and elsewhere. Currently, we are writing a comparative paper with Hungarian colleagues on Athens and Budapest on this theme. And having realized that after many years, that it happens in many cities, I'm now preparing a collective volume on comparative microsegregation, which will bring together evidence on this from 20 cities from Europe, East Asia, and Latin America. The question that I would put today is if microsegregation is something that you can find in many different cities across the world, why is it still an under-researched topic? The answer, in my view, is that urban studies and segregation studies in particular are dominated by the urban context of the English-speaking world. And within that context, the attention is focused uniquely on the neighborhood level, since cities, especially in the US, are low-rise, except for the CBDs, and their spatially expanded neighborhoods are much more racially and socially homogeneous than in the rest of the urban world. My understanding, therefore, is that in order to analyze urban processes in your context, which does not belong to the English-speaking world, your concepts and tools have to go through a kind of decolonization process. And this is a double process of gaining context awareness for the place you work on and realize the contextual limits of the tools and concepts pretending to be universal. Moreover, and I'll finish with this critical understanding regarding dominant tools and concepts in our discipline is not necessarily against the obvious opponents supporting capitalism and the market. Context-blind theories and concepts are often part of very well intended and intentioned attempts to analyze urban reality in radical and subversive ways. Thank you.